While my mother-in-law was happily shopping with my husband's mistress, I was canceling all her cards. My mother-in-law still knows nothing. She doesn't know that this palace she lives in belongs entirely to me. My revenge has only just begun. All right, mark your attendance first with a subscription, a like, and a comment. If you have already done that, let's get into the beginning of the story. The clinking of a silver spoon against a porcelain plate was the only music filling the grandiose dining room. A massive crystal chandelier above the table reflected its golden light onto the cold, gleaming surface of the Italian marble. This was the stage where the drama of this family played out every night. Kenyatta Dubois, the unacknowledged director and lead actress, listlessly stirred her cream of vegetable soup. That night, she had prepared her husband's favorite dish, smothered oxtails with gravy. It was a process that took over 5 hours, but Kenyatta had done it gladly, hoping to see a smile of satisfaction on his face. However, D'Angelo Vance ate in silence. His eyes landed more often on his smartphone screen than on his wife sitting across from him. "This stew is actually decent, Kenyatta." The voice of Mrs. Eudora broke the silence. Her tone was dry, but full of invisible thorns. "It reminds me of the taste of a lentil stew from some run-down shack near our old neighborhood. For something made by someone like you, it tastes quite authentic." A compliment wrapped in an insult. Kenyatta was used to it. She simply sketched a slight curve with her lips, a pale smile she had practiced for years. "I am glad it is to your liking, Mama." "Of course Mama likes it. Mama appreciates anything her daughter-in-law does," said D'Angelo, finally lifting his eyes from his phone. He winked at Kenyatta as if they were a complicit team. But Kenyatta knew that defense was hollow. It was simply D'Angelo's way of ending potentially awkward conversations, not to protect her pride. "But next time, try a recipe from that French culinary arts book I bought you. Our family needs to get used to high-class dishes, not this country-style market food," continued Mrs. Eudora, deliberately setting down her spoon with an elegant gesture. Kenyatta did not respond. She merely looked at her husband, seeking a minimum of support in his eyes, but all she found was his elusive gaze as he busily poured water into his goblet. At that very moment, Kenyatta felt like the loneliest person in the palace she herself had built. This house, filled with high columns and imported furniture, felt colder and emptier than the modest rental room she had grown up in. After dinner, as always, it was Kenyatta's task to clean everything up. The housekeepers could only work until the afternoon, a rule of Mrs. Eudora's to supposedly protect the family's privacy during the evening. In reality, it was another way to underscore Kenyatta's position as the personal servant of the house. While she scrubbed the expensive plates she would never have dared to use early in her marriage, Kenyatta looked at herself in the reflection of the dark kitchen window. It was the tired face of a woman who had everything but possessed nothing. In the outside world, unknown to her husband and mother-in-law, she was a queen. Kenyatta was the founder and CEO of Apex Innovations, a tech startup currently valued in the billions of dollars. She had built the company from scratch with her own sweat and tears. But in this house, she deliberately hid her shine. She let D'Angelo appear as the successful head of the household, who lived off investments from his father's inheritance, a lie they had created together so as not to bruise D'Angelo's ego. All this opulence, the mansion, the cars, the vacations, even Mrs. Eudora's unlimited credit card came out of Kenyatta's account. They lived comfortably at the expense of her hard work while constantly trampling on her pride. That night, as she rinsed the suds from her hands, Kenyatta asked herself for the first time, "How long must I continue with this charade?" Kenyatta's doubt did not arrive like a storm. It was like a slow drizzle soaking her clothes and chilling her bones. It all started with a routine check in her home office, a minimalist space equipped with state-of-the-art technology that contrasted with the rest of the house, considered by D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora as Kenyatta's strange hobby corner. There, behind the thick, solid wood door, Kenyatta shed her role as the submissive wife. She was KD, a respected initial in the business world. In front of monitors displaying complex data and charts, she simultaneously monitored the pulse of her company and her personal finances. It was then that she noticed an anomaly. The credit card she had given to Mrs. Eudora, normally used only for monthly shopping at high-end supermarkets like Whole Foods or occasional meetings at a hotel cafe, showed a strange spending pattern. There was a bill from the luxury boutique Maison Élysée for a sum equivalent to the price of a car. There were also multiple transactions at the Pearl Aesthetic Institute, an elite beauty salon where a treatment cost a manager's salary. And what appeared most frequently were dinner bills at the Skyline View, a fine dining restaurant atop a skyscraper that not even Kenyatta herself had visited. At first, Kenyatta ignored it. She thought perhaps Mrs. Eudora wanted to treat herself, but the transactions repeated almost weekly, and always on the same days that D'Angelo claimed to have to work late on a new project or meet with an important client from out of town. The suspicion grew denser. D'Angelo became more distant. His phone was always on silent and never left his side. He often walked away to take calls in a hushed voice. Sometimes, when he returned home late at night, Kenyatta perceived the smell of an unknown woman's perfume on his shirt. It wasn't the strong, classic fragrance of her mother-in-law, but a sweet, modern scent. When Kenyatta tried to ask, D'Angelo always had a slick answer. "Ah, that must be a client's perfume, baby. The conference room was very small." "Oh, you know I don't like talking about work at home. It gives me a headache." The breaking point came with a call from Nia, her best friend from their HBCU days. Nia's voice sounded hesitant on the other end of the line. "Kenyatta, are you okay?" "Of course, Nia. Why do you ask?" Kenyatta replied, forcing herself to sound cheerful. There was a pause. Kenyatta could hear Nia take a deep breath. "I don't want to meddle, but I saw D'Angelo by chance at Phipps Plaza a few days ago. He wasn't alone." Kenyatta's heart beat a little faster. "He was surely with a client," she said, more to convince herself. "He didn't look like a client, Kenyatta. And I think I also saw Mrs. Eudora at the same restaurant, at the same table, laughing with them. But I was far away. I'm not sure." The call ended in an awkward atmosphere. Kenyatta said, "Thank you," but her mind was a whirlwind. Mrs. Eudora, laughing with D'Angelo and an unknown woman? The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, forming a terrible image she didn't even dare to imagine. The drizzle of doubt now felt like a heavy thundercloud over her head, ready to unleash a storm at any moment. 2 days later, the storm arrived via a brief message on her phone. That afternoon, Kenyatta was on a video conference with her team in Singapore. She was discussing the expansion strategy in the Southeast Asian market with eloquence and confidence. On the screen, she was a brilliant CEO, but when the call ended and silence flooded her office again, she returned to being the restless Kenyatta. Her phone vibrated on the desk, showing a notification of a message from Nia. Her heart skipped a beat. With slightly trembling hands, she opened the message. It was a short sentence. "I'm sorry, Kenyatta. I think you need to see this." Below the sentence was a photo. Kenyatta's world seemed to stop. Her breath caught in her throat. The photo, apparently taken secretly from a table opposite, showed a scene in a cafe at a luxury boutique. There, sitting very intimately, were 3 people she knew. Her husband, D'Angelo, was looking adoringly at a young woman beside him. It was, without a doubt, the mistress. She was leaning flirtatiously on D'Angelo's shoulder, showing him a new shopping bag from a famous brand. But it wasn't that which destroyed Kenyatta. What shattered her heart was the third person in the photo. Mrs. Eudora, her mother-in-law, was sitting across from them with a smile so radiant and sincere that she had never directed it at Kenyatta. And her hand, Mrs. Eudora's hand, was reaching out tenderly to brush a strand of hair from the mistress's cheek. A maternal gesture, a sign of acceptance, a seal of blessing. Kenyatta felt a coldness soak her to the bone, colder than the marble floor of her house. D'Angelo's betrayal was painful enough, but seeing her mother-in-law, whom she had served, despite always being ignored, conspiring with her husband's mistress, and even coddling her in that way, was like being stabbed in the front and back at the same time. She zoomed in on the photo with numb eyes, examining every detail. The shopping bag the mistress held was from the Maison Élysée boutique. Their table was full of pretty desserts from the Imperial Patisserie. Every strange charge on the credit card now had a face, the satisfied face of the mistress and the happy face of Mrs. Eudora. They were feasting on her money, celebrating their betrayal behind her back. Crash. The glass of water next to her laptop fell to the floor, shattering just like her heart. But Kenyatta didn't cry. The tears seemed to have frozen in her eyelids. There was only a hollow emptiness, and that emptiness began to slowly fill with a cold, burning anger. She looked at her pale face reflected in the dark screen of her phone. The woman in the reflection looked fragile and defeated, but in her eyes, something had just been born, something hard, sharp, and relentless. This charade had reached its final act. Kenyatta remained motionless in her chair for nearly an hour. She sat in silence amidst the shards of broken glass, letting the stillness of the office absorb all the emotions boiling inside her. The pain, the shock, and the disappointment settled slowly, replaced by a terrifying calm. It was the calm before the tsunami. She stood up and stepped over the broken glass without flinching. Her steps took her toward the large window overlooking the perfectly manicured backyard. A garden she had designed and paid to maintain, but had never been able to enjoy in peace. Until now, she had thought her patience was a virtue. She thought if she submitted and dedicated herself, she would one day be accepted. She thought if she hid her power, she could maintain peace in the home and her husband's ego. How naive she had been. Her patience was taken for weakness. Her dedication was considered a duty. Her sacrifice was taken for granted. They, D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora, had taken everything from her. Her time, her energy, her money, and now her dignity. They let her build this palace only to turn her into a servant within it. Meanwhile, they brought in a stranger and sat her on the throne. "It's over," she whispered to her reflection in the window. Her voice was hoarse but firm. She returned to her desk. With a decisive movement, she turned the monitors back on. The stock charts, the financial reports, the urgent emails from directors, everything looked different. Now, this was no longer just a job. It was her kingdom. It was her source of power, what she had built with blood and sweat, something she would not allow the parasites in her life to trample on. The patient woman who cooked oxtails for 5 hours had died that afternoon. What remained was Kenyatta Dubois, the CEO of Apex Innovations, a strategist known for being cold and calculating. The long slumber as a submissive wife was over. The queen had awakened. She picked up the phone and dialed her personal assistant's number. "Miss Price, good afternoon." "Yes, Mrs. Dubois, how can I help you?" The professional voice of Miss Price rang through the receiver. "I need several things. First, prepare a full report of all my personal assets, including real estate, vehicles, and bank accounts. Separate what are community assets and what are purely assets in my name acquired before the marriage. Understood?" "Understood, Mrs. Dubois." Second, contact our legal team. Tell them to prepare a draft for divorce and division of assets. Attach all the assets I requested in the first point as initial data. There was a brief pause. Ms. Price was clearly surprised. "Yes, Mrs. Dubois, I will process it immediately." "And Price," Kenyatta added, her voice cold as ice, "from now on, inform me in real time of all expenses generated on the additional credit cards in the names of D'Angelo Vance and Eudora Vance." "Understood, Mrs. Dubois." After hanging up, Kenyatta opened a drawer in her desk. She took out a small notebook with a leather cover. On the first page, she wrote with neat, decisive handwriting, "Operation, take it all back." A plan began to form in her mind, not an emotional revenge plan, but a calculated business strategy. The goal was to strip them of all the power and luxury that had made them so arrogant and force them to face reality. She would make them feel what it was like to have nothing. The first execution of her plan began the next morning. Kenyatta deliberately got up earlier, put on her best power suit, and left the house. Before D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora woke up, she had breakfast in her CEO office on the 50th floor, overlooking the entire city of Atlanta. The landscape reminded her how vast her world was and how small her domestic problems were from that height. Exactly at 9:00 a.m., she called her private banker. "Mr. Robinson, good morning. This is Kenyatta Dubois." "Ah, Mrs. Dubois, it is an honor to receive your call. How can I help you?" "I need you to freeze all additional credit and debit cards linked to my accounts with immediate effect. All cards. Also the ones in the name of Mr. D'Angelo Vance and Mrs. Eudora Vance?" Mr. Robinson asked to confirm. "Yes, all of them. As a reason, simply note security reasons. Say we have detected suspicious activity," Kenyatta said in a business tone that admitted no reply. "Understood, Mrs. Dubois. Request received. I will process it immediately. In 5 minutes, all cards will be inoperative." Kenyatta hung up, feeling a cold satisfaction. The first blow had been struck. On the other side of the city, Mrs. Eudora and her son's mistress, Callis, were enjoying the height of their arrogance. After a treatment at a beauty salon, they decided to have lunch at a 5-star hotel restaurant. Callis flirtatiously pointed out the lobster thermidor and the most expensive champagne. Mrs. Eudora, feeling very generous and powerful with a wallet that wasn't hers, simply smiled and nodded. "You deserve the best, dear. Our future daughter-in-law has to look perfect," said Mrs. Eudora with a wink. When they finished dessert and the bill arrived, Mrs. Eudora smugly handed her black card to the waiter. A few minutes later, the waiter returned with a flustered look. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The card has been declined." Mrs. Eudora's face turned red. "What do you mean declined?" "Try again. Surely the signal was bad," she snapped at the waiter. He tried again. The result was the same. "It still isn't working, ma'am." Callis was starting to get impatient. Mrs. Eudora clicked her tongue and took another card from her purse, the platinum one. Declined as well. Panic began to take hold of her. She tried the debit card. The same. Murmurs from nearby tables began to be heard. Mrs. Eudora's face burned. Shame, anger, and confusion mixed into one. Immediately, she took out her phone and dialed Kenyatta's number. In her office, Kenyatta saw her mother-in-law's name flashing on her phone screen. She let it ring a couple of times before answering with a slightly sleepy voice. "Tell me, Mama." "Kenyatta, what have you done to my cards? Why are they all being declined?" Mrs. Eudora's shrill voice was heard, so loud she didn't need to put it on speaker. Kenyatta pulled the phone away from her ear for a moment. "Ah, yes, they were declined, Mama?" she asked, feigning surprise. "Maybe it's a bank network failure, or maybe you entered the PIN wrong. Try again later." "Don't lie to me. This is your doing, surely. Reactivate them right now." "I'm sorry. I'm in the middle of a meeting. I cannot be interrupted," Kenyatta replied calmly. And without waiting for an answer, she hung up, looked at her phone screen, and then turned it off. On the other end, she could imagine the panic and fury of her mother-in-law. She could imagine the sullen face of Callis, whose plans to live a life of luxury that day had been ruined. A small, cold smile, the first genuine smile, appeared on Kenyatta's lips. The game had just begun, and this time she held all the cards. The front door of the imposing house burst open, breaking the silence of the night. Mrs. Eudora entered like a whirlwind, her face congested with anger and humiliation. Behind her followed Callis with a sour face. The humiliation at the restaurant had been unforgettable. After all the cards were declined, Callis had to pay with her own debit card, an unexpected expense that had her complaining throughout the taxi ride. Kenyatta was waiting for them in the living room. She was sitting quietly on a single armchair, with a cup of hot jasmine tea in her hand, as if waiting for guests of honor. The image enraged Mrs. Eudora even more. "Kenyatta Dubois!" she shouted. Her voice echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "How dare you humiliate me in public? Who do you think you are, huh?" Kenyatta took a slow sip of her tea before setting it on the table. She looked at her mother-in-law with cold, unfamiliar eyes that Mrs. Eudora had never seen before. "I am just sitting in my house. Mama, are you the one who came in shouting at this time of night? Who is the rude one here?" Mrs. Eudora gasped. The calm, sharp retort left her speechless for a moment. Until now, Kenyatta would have been the daughter-in-law who bowed her head and asked for forgiveness for any fault. But the woman in front of her was different. Callous, sensing the unfavorable atmosphere, decided to intervene with an ingratiating tone. "Ma'am, calm down. Surely Kenyatta didn't do it on purpose, right, Kenyatta? Next time, don't forget to pay the credit card bills, okay? The lady gets embarrassed." It was a fatal mistake. Kenyatta's eyes locked onto Kelly's. Her gaze was as sharp as a scalpel. "First, I have never forgotten to pay a single bill. Second, I don't recall inviting you to my house. And third—" Kenyatta paused, letting every word sink in. "This is a matter between my mother-in-law and me. A stranger has no business interfering." Callus's face paled instantly. The status of future daughter-in-law that Mrs. Eudora took such pride in seemed to vanish without a trace under Kenyatta's gaze. She looked for D'Angelo, who had just come down the stairs upon hearing the commotion. Seeking defense, Mrs. Eudora finally recovered her voice. "A stranger? She is D'Angelo's future wife and my future daughter-in-law. The one who will soon be a stranger here is you. You are nothing but a useless daughter-in-law who can't even manage the household finances." Kenyatta sketched a slight smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The household finances. Mama, do you really want to talk about that? From what I know, the people who have never contributed a dime to the finances of this house are the ones demanding and shouting the loudest." The barb was aimed precisely at Mrs. Eudora and D'Angelo simultaneously. D'Angelo, who had remained silent until now, finally felt he had to come to the defense of his mother and his mistress. But before he could open his mouth, Kenyatta had already stood up. "I'm tired. I'm going to rest," she said with a final tone. She walked past the three people, still paralyzed by shock, and went up the stairs toward her room. She didn't look back once. That night, for the first time, Mrs. Eudora felt that something was wrong, very wrong. She was used to living like a queen in this house where her every word was a command. But tonight she felt stripped of her power by the daughter-in-law she had always considered a doormat. The storm she had unleashed was nothing but a breeze compared to the cold calm of the awakened Kenyatta. After Kenyatta disappeared into her room, Mrs. Eudora unleashed her remaining anger on D'Angelo. "Did you see the wife you chose? She dares to answer me back. As her husband, you should educate her. Go talk to her right now and tell her to reactivate all my cards." She yanked her son's arm, complaining. D'Angelo, with his ego wounded by Kenyatta's icy attitude, felt challenged. He was the man of the house, or at least he had always believed so. With an arrogant stride, he followed Kenyatta to her bedroom. He found her standing in front of the closet, choosing silk pajamas as if nothing had happened. The sight provoked him. "Kenyatta, what is with this attitude?" he asked loudly. "Why are you disrespecting my mother? And why are you blocking the cards?" Kenyatta turned and looked at her husband with an impassive expression. "I'm simply tired of being insulted in my own home, D'Angelo, and the cards were just a routine security measure." "Security? What nonsense! You humiliated my mother on purpose in front of Callus. You're jealous, aren't you?" accused D'Angelo, trying to find a reason his shallow understanding could accept. Kenyatta let out a small laugh, a dry, humorless sound that made D'Angelo uncomfortable. "Jealous, D'Angelo? I assure you my current emotions go far beyond something so simple." "I don't want to know," snapped D'Angelo, returning to his arrogant mode. "Go down right now, apologize to my mother, and reactivate all the cards tomorrow morning. I am your husband, and this is an order." It was this exact moment that Kenyatta had been waiting for. She put down the pajamas and walked over to D'Angelo, looking him straight in the eyes. There was no longer sweetness or pleading, only the gaze of a CEO evaluating an incompetent subordinate. "D'Angelo Vance," she called him with a low, dangerous voice. Do you really want to talk to me about financial matters? Do you really want to argue about orders and authority in this house? D'Angelo fell silent. There was a clear tone of threat in that question, a level of power he had never heard in Kenyatta before. Until now, he had no idea where her money came from. He only knew it was always there, flowing into his account every month. Money enough for a lavish lifestyle and to support a mistress. He had always assumed it came from investments Kenyatta managed. "Of course I do," he replied, trying to cling to the shreds of his pride, though his voice trembled slightly. Kenyatta smiled sideways. "Fine, then explain to me what your source of income has been this month. How much have you contributed to paying the mortgage, the electricity bills, the staff salaries, or even the food you just ate for dinner? Before giving an order to anyone, make sure you have the right to do so." D'Angelo's tongue froze. He couldn't answer. He had never truly worked a day in his life. Everything he had was given to him. And in that moment, under his wife's piercing gaze, he felt like a foolish prince who had just been stripped of his crown. "It's late. I need to sleep," said Kenyatta, turning around and ending the conversation. D'Angelo could only stand there stunned, his anger mixed with confusion and a sense of humiliation. He had come to teach his wife a lesson, but instead felt he had just received one himself. He still didn't fully understand what was happening, but one thing was certain. The Kenyatta he knew had disappeared, and he didn't like her replacement at all. If the credit card incident was the main tremor, the following days were a series of aftershocks that slowly brought down the building of his comfort. Kenyatta no longer needed to say anything. She just acted in silence. The next morning, Mrs. Eudora, impeccably dressed, was preparing to go to her social gathering with her sorority sisters. She waited impatiently in the driveway. Her personal driver, Mr. Henderson, did not arrive. After several unanswered calls, she finally called the limousine service company. The answer was brief and professional. "We are sorry, ma'am. The service contract for your address is being reviewed at the request of our main client. Service is suspended until further notice." "Main client?" Mrs. Eudora frowned, not understanding. Grudgingly and grumbling, she called a rideshare. A supremely humiliating experience for her. Meanwhile, D'Angelo was trying to transfer money to Callis, who wouldn't stop complaining and demanding compensation for the restaurant incident. The notification on his phone screen left him frozen. Insufficient funds. He checked his account. Kenyatta's monthly transfer, which normally should have arrived by the 1st, was nowhere to be found. His account was practically empty. Panic seized him. He called Kenyatta, but the call went straight to voicemail. The chaos in the house intensified. The head housekeeper approached Mrs. Eudora with a worried face. "Ma'am, our wages have not been deposited yet. Normally they would be here by now, and the pantry inventory is almost exhausted. The online grocery delivery service has also been suspended for non-payment." Mrs. Eudora, who had never worried about such trivial details, could only snap, "Well, use the cash in the house." "There is no cash left, ma'am," replied the employee. Mrs. Eudora was speechless. The house, always cool, now felt stifling. The premium cable TV with hundreds of channels suddenly stopped working. The Wi-Fi speed, once ultra-fast, was now as slow as a dial-up connection from the past. The comforts they had taken for granted as a right were being cut off one by one without warning. Kenyatta was like a ghost in her own home. She left for work before dawn and returned late at night when everyone was asleep. She deliberately avoided confrontation. She let them stew in their own panic, feeling how the money faucet, which had always flowed in torrents, now dripped until dry. Their luxury was nothing more than an illusion that could be turned off as easily as flipping a switch. And now that switch was in her hand. In her rented luxury apartment, Callis was starting to get restless. Her handsome, rich prince, D'Angelo, now visited her more often with a frown than with shopping bags. The promises of dinners at the newest restaurants, a trip to Bali, a limited edition watch, everything had evaporated. "Baby, what's wrong with you lately?" Callis asked, massaging his temples. They had just eaten dinner, not at a fancy restaurant, but takeout D'Angelo had bought on the way. There are some problems at home. What kind of problems? Nothing major, just Kenyatta is acting a little weird, said D'Angelo, trying to avoid the subject. How weird? Weird enough that my monthly allowance hasn't arrived yet, snapped D'Angelo. His tone was starting to sharpen. And where is your car? Why are you taking Ubers everywhere lately? What will my friends think if I tell them I'm dating a man without a car? D'Angelo sighed deeply. The car is in the shop and there's been a problem with the cards. That's why I haven't been able to make the transfer. Just have a little patience. Patience. I've had enough patience, D'Angelo. I rejected plenty of other rich men for you. You promised you'd marry me and give me a better life than that bland wife of yours. And now what is this? Yesterday I even had to pay the restaurant bill. Callis exploded. Her sweet facade vanished. Her relationship, built on the foundations of luxury and lies, began to show its first cracks. Callis wasn't with D'Angelo for love, but for the lifestyle he could offer. When that lifestyle was threatened, her loyalty also wavered. Listen, this is temporary. Soon everything will go back to normal. Callis pushed him away. I don't want promises. I want proof. Next week is my birthday. Buy me that Birkin bag we saw. If you buy it for me, I'll believe everything is fine. Callis didn't say it, but her threat floated clearly in the air. D'Angelo sank helplessly into the sofa. That bag cost tens of thousands of dollars. Even in normal circumstances, it was money he would have to specifically ask Kenyatta for. Now, with cobwebs in his account, Callis's demand felt like a death sentence. He was trapped. On one side was his wife, who had become a cold monster controlling his life. On the other, his mistress, who started showing her claws as soon as the money ran out. The foolish prince realized his perfect world was crumbling. A week of deprivation was enough to push Mrs. Eudora and D'Angelo to their mental limit. They couldn't take it anymore. That night, they deliberately waited for Kenyatta to return and intercepted her directly in the living room. The lights were on brightly, creating an interrogation atmosphere. We need to talk, Kenyatta, said D'Angelo, trying to sound authoritative, though his face showed exhaustion and frustration. Kenyatta set down her briefcase and looked at them both calmly. Speak. What is it you want exactly? Stop acting dumb, snapped Mrs. Eudora, unable to contain herself. You are torturing us slowly, cutting off all comforts, humiliating us, making us live like beggars. After all the kindness we have shown you, this is how you repay us. Kindness. Kenyatta almost laughed. What kindness are you talking about? The daily insults or blessing your son's affair? Kenyatta, this is too much, continued D'Angelo. You are my wife. Your duty is to serve your husband and your family, not to act on your own like this. If you can't be a good wife, then maybe we what, D'Angelo? Kenyatta cut in. Her voice was sharp. We divorce? Is that what you want? The direct question left D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora in shock. They only wanted to threaten her. They weren't really prepared for such a drastic consequence. They knew that without Kenyatta, they were nothing. D'Angelo, she has no respect anymore. She is trying to destroy your home, shouted Mrs. Eudora, trying to manipulate the situation. You are ungrateful, Kenyatta. We welcomed you into this prestigious family. You, coming from a regular family, we gave you a life of luxury, and you have become a troublemaker. Enough is enough. Kenyatta was done with their false narratives. She said nothing. With a very calm movement, she opened her briefcase, took out a brown envelope, and placed it on the coffee table between them. What is this? Asked D'Angelo suspiciously. Open it, replied Kenyatta. With trembling hands, D'Angelo opened the envelope and pulled out its contents, a glossy A4-sized photograph. Mrs. Eudora also leaned in to see. In an instant, all the anger and arrogance disappeared from their faces, replaced by a ghastly pallor. The photo clearly showed the scene at the boutique cafe. D'Angelo looking with love at Callis, Callis leaning flirtatiously, and Mrs. Eudora smiling happily while tenderly arranging Callis's hair, the irrefutable proof of a triple betrayal. A suffocating silence filled the room. The ticking of the grandfather clock sounded like a hammer. Kenyatta finally spoke. Her voice was low, but it trembled, not from crying, but from anger held back for a long time. "Thank you." "Why exactly, Mama?" Her eyes locked directly onto Mrs. Eudora. "For the kindness on your part of blessing my husband's affair with my money? Or for the life of luxury you enjoyed with my husband's concubine while I worked my fingers to the bone to pay for it all?" Then she turned to D'Angelo. "And you, D'Angelo, spoke of a wife's duty. Is it a husband's duty to betray, lie, and live like a parasite off his wife?" There was no answer. Both were frozen, naked before the truth, caught in the act. The photograph on the table became a silent judge, handing down their sentence. The real storm had just begun, and they realized they no longer had anywhere to hide. The silence that followed Kenyatta's words felt heavier than any storm. The photograph on the table became the center of gravity in the room, drawing all gazes and sucking up all the oxygen. D'Angelo looked at the photo, then at Kenyatta, and back at the photo. His face was a canvas of confusion and evident guilt. He had no excuse. But Mrs. Eudora, who had lived for decades behind a mask of arrogance, would not give up so easily. For her, admitting a mistake was the greatest form of weakness. Her pale face began to redden again, not from shame, but from an anger seeking an outlet. "It's a setup," she hissed, pointing at the photo with a trembling finger. "It's a manipulated photo, surely. You are doing this on purpose to get rid of us and keep all my son's fortune." Kenyatta looked at her without blinking. "Your son's fortune, Mama? What fortune is all this talking about?" Mrs. Eudora gestured with her hand encompassing the magnificent room. "Everything in this house belongs to D'Angelo. You only live here on borrowed time. You should be grateful we let you live here. And now you dare to stage this cheap drama." That threat was her last and fatal mistake. It was the final weapon she had always used to intimidate Kenyatta. But tonight, the weapon turned against her. "Is that so?" said Kenyatta calmly, as if dealing with a difficult client. "If you insist that I only live on borrowed time and that this house is your son's property, then there is nothing more to talk about." Mrs. Eudora felt she had won. "I'm glad you know your place. Now pack your bags and get out of my son's house. Out!" D'Angelo seemed surprised by the escalation of the situation. "Mama..." He tried to intervene, but his mother's withering glare silenced him. Kenyatta didn't move an inch. She merely looked at her mother-in-law with an undecipherable expression, a mixture of pity and disgust. "I will leave with pleasure," said Mrs. Eudora. She smiled triumphantly. "But the ones who will have to pack bags will be you two." She leaned down, opened the briefcase she had left on the floor, and took out a thick blue plastic folder. She opened it and spread its contents on the table, right next to the photo of the betrayal.